ROADCRAFT is an upcoming construction simulation game developed by Saber Interactive, and it's published by Focus, set to release on May 20th. It's coming out for the PlayStation 5, Xbox, PC, and it brings players into the driver's seat of what is basically a disaster recovery company tasked with rebuilding all these areas devastated by natural disasters. Price-wise, this is $40 for the normal version and $50 for an edition that comes with the DLC free whenever it comes out. Oh, and you get a car. Now, first up, obviously, this isn't SnowRunner or Mud Runner. This is its own game that doesn't even carry the subtitle at all, and there's a reason. Where SnowRunner was a treatise on managing simulated resources in the form of just how many times you could barrel roll your Jeep Wisconsin down a canyon side without it being considered totally unrecoverable, Mud Runner was a deep sim about going to and fro, about delivering needed supplies to unwanted locations in the Siberian backlands. ROADCRAFT, then, is a logistics and disaster simulator light with aspects of the prior games merged into a resource management simulator. So if you're a fan of those and you're wanting an exact sequel, don't look here, because it's not that. What it is a unique combination of all those plus its own ideas. As the person in charge of a recovery station, consistently going out and doing repairs after massive emergencies, you're not only going to be handling the driving, but also the business side of it. Speaking of business, I've got a ton of reviews coming up, as well as some exclusives for some titles that maybe you haven't even heard of. Subscribe and you'll get more. I appreciate it. So, first up, it is apparently much harder to run a disaster recovery company than I thought. In ROADCRAFT, I was thrown into the thick of things as the head of operations, tasked with restoring different services to areas damaged by storms and floods, because I can only assume a god here played a shit ton of SimCity and kept turning the disaster mods on. For me, the time spent with the preview code supplied by Focus was indeed focused on 3 distinct locations, with varying problems on each, and I had to take out my assembled team of questionable vehicles with even more questionable names and try to repair it. And by questionable names, I mean rusted cable layer, which doesn't sound friggin' safe at all. In the full game, it's supposed to have about 40 vehicles total, but I can assume there's going to be some overlap in usage. Of course, that could also be a sign of how I tried to run things during this preview. After leaping in, I was offered those locations, and I chose the first tutorial area. It was mud and trees and deceptively deep swampy areas with some creeks mixed in. That being said, I decided scouting was really step 1 in these areas, and step 2 in others, it just depends on if there's already some recovery vehicles there. The game had me out there using that scout vehicle to plow through those areas and line up travel routes for larger vehicles that handle like a cow beefed up for slaughter that also took all the paxel. And I am serious, I have a newfound respect for someone who tries to take an erratically tracked vehicle down a slope with offset weight, because the driver, that's me, also wanted to keep a hold of a tree so that they could cut it and strip it closer to where the semi was going to pick it up. Clearing spots or making travel possible is one of the major nightmares here that you're going to face. You have bulldozers, cranes, cable layers, dump trucks, excavators, pavers, and more and more. And getting vehicles from location A to B is usually done by traveling through locations F, U, C, K, E, and D. You can use vehicles to clear the way and also recycle almost everything in the game world. This is done with a handy color-coded system with items in the game that are shaded slightly to reflect which recycling center that they can be taken to, which gives you items. Recycling what I could by using a crane to load up some trucks was easy enough with a click and enter system that the game has. Using the map to identify which vehicle I wanted to go into, hitting a button, and boom, you're in there, all with no loading. Now, if I can do a job with the minimum steps, I'm going to try that. But one thing I learned with ROADCRAFT after 10 plus hours is that a game like this is notoriously painful when you overestimate your own ability, which I seem to do. For example, I can trounce across a couple small creeks and even power my tracked vehicles through a flooded out trailer park if I wanted to, as with games prior. If you're not aware of the exact depth of a spot because you haven't gone there with the scout, you can flood the vehicle and boom, that's time lost as it's recovered. It's at this point where trying to decide if you use sand from a sand lot dumped into a series of strategically placed spots is the smart move to get other vehicles somewhere, because I can also have a grader come and level it out. I can have a paver pour asphalt on it and then a roller go around and smooth that and make it a trip that's safer for some of the larger vehicles, but that takes time. Then, just as I got everything to a spot, I realized, oh shit, I need to actually also run electricity to that location, which is damn near impossible without a ton of prep, because the cable layer is the equivalent of your laziest best friend. The guy that just puts a shirt on to do a Zoom call and suspiciously won't stand up to answer the door in the middle of it. It's fat, it's lazy, and it barely controls and gets stuck on almost everything. So I decided to clear out some space for that. I would leap into the bulldozer and chipper shredder and pull some stumps out and try to make a track for that power supply to be delivered to the concrete mixer. I really enjoyed the flexibility here of me deciding how I was going to go about it, the risk versus reward, and really just making sure the resources get to where they're supposed to in the best way possible. But the name isn't fooling you. It has the ability to create roads, which initially I didn't know exactly how much I would enjoy, especially when it comes to putting a bridge over a creek. I found myself realizing that there were quicker ways to get to spot A and B, and those quick ways might work for a scout kind of vehicle where assuredly you can see exactly the depth of things and control it easier, but it's not going to work for a tree cutter or, as I said earlier, that pipe layer. And that diversity and specific requirements for each vehicle and to get them to a spot where they can actually work correctly is pretty vital here, with the end result always being trying to do those repairs and trying to get those vehicles to those spots in as much efficiency as possible. I found that the gameplay loop changed a bit as I continued through the different maps. And exploring those maps with the scout, that's going to be the feeling of the DNA that's combined with all these games. That's going to be very solidly in your bailiwick if you played those prior titles. And you're going to feel like, okay, I am eminently familiar with this. You can also use the AI to do some stuff like plot a course, grade a road, and so forth. And surprisingly, the AI isn't terrible. It's not extraordinary either. So planning is still paramount. Planning, I admit, I didn't do in some cases. So that might not be the AI. I mean, the only comparison I really have is road crews up past at 3 a.m. on some freeway, and my last experience with the paver in this game, which ended up in that POS upside down on the opposite side of the hill I wanted it. But there are some things missing, and I want to talk about that because as the first few hours went through, my ideas of what this game is changed. It's a different beast. There isn't a fuel gauge in this game. You don't have a gear shift in the style of the prior games. This is a high-low differential kind of thing. It also doesn't have a tire pressure system that I could see. It's not Mud Runner where they're exploratory games, harkening back to my childhood of going 4x4 in the backyard, terracing down a muddy road, and consistently challenging gravity and my good logics. ROADCRAFT is exactly what it says. It's crafting transportation, roads, and repairing things. The ability to get recovery crews to places they shouldn't. Would the game be better with a hard mode where you could control things like gasoline and tire pressure? I strongly feel like it would. But at the same time, you are playing a character whose delivery and recovery and repairs are hired for by outside groups, so I assume you probably at least have gas. That's not really me explaining things away. It's just saying I sort of get where they're going with on this one. The game also, when it comes to graphics, is a step up. This is a new engine, which generically I think they call like default engine or something like that. Even as a fan of SnowRunner and its kind, I think this engine does an impressive job replicating zones after floods or other natural disasters. Lighting and in particular texture detail and debris detail are overall very good. ROADCRAFT does offer something different in that way. It's not necessarily the desolate locations that we may have seen in the prior titles. It's sort of a middle ground. Also, jumping into some vehicles we haven't seen before is awesome. Massive cranes with the ability to put vehicles in the back of other trucks and just different things that we haven't seen before. Well, there's always going to be idiosyncrasies and caveats made for accuracy, though. But it never stopped getting fun watching a truck sink to the bottom of an explorer's trench that you just thought you could dive through at full speed, and it continues to look great in all those ways. I love the shift of water and ruts and just how all of that merges together. Luckily, at least so far, when you jump from vehicle to vehicle, and performance was very good, even on a 2080 and a 3080 at 1080p and 1440p resolutions respectively. There's also DLSS and FSR for upscaling. When it comes to the sound and the effects there, I thought the sound was fine. You can hear the sound of a vehicle smash up. You can hear the gears grinding. You can hear the tires hit different rocks. This is a sound system and sound samples that many times we're probably getting some asset reuse. And I'm fine with that kind of thing. At some point, you listen to a sound effect and you say, you know what, this is one of the better replications of this particular sound. We might as well use it. Trudging up some rock or some hill is not only visually being identified on where you are, but you could listen to the sound and understand that moment that one of the tires ends up slipping. When it comes to music, there wasn't a great deal. I didn't listen to most of it because I was trying to really hear the different sound effects of the cars and understand exactly what it was trying to deliver when it comes to the sound. Fun factor though, this is just a preview. I did find that there was some confusion about exactly what I needed to do, and that didn't necessarily completely go away. The menu system here is a series of almost nested menus where you get a job on what you need to do, then you hit that job and it ends up hot tabbing over to wherever that location is. However, there was some difficulty in general just understanding the steps, especially later on when it says, okay, now you can do this in any order you want. And I was like, well, it didn't even really explain the order initially too much. There's some tutorials that you can find in the main menu screen, but they weren't always super helpful. There's a bit of lacking information on the 1, 2, 3 as well. I also could find that with these maps, they aren't necessarily super sizable. I know we know supposedly exactly how they're going to be, but I just want to see more of that, more advancement in exactly how these maps are going to play out. I want to see more of these and just see how big they are and exactly where the trade-off happens between the Scout and a lot of those other vehicles, and if that continues to play out through the full game proper. When it comes to the vehicles, though, I did like them. I liked controlling all of them, leaping into the different views and using them. Sometimes I found that a particular vehicle in a particular section wasn't necessarily used, though. I would like to see how that's going to play out. What I did like was the general feel. I like the idea of repair. I love the idea of going out and recycling. ROADCRAFT began to deliver the exact same sim feeling that other titles not within this particular company's bailiwick have delivered. We're doing something that you would never really think possible, or in the least case, interesting, turned out to actually be a Zen-like state to it, where you sit back and you try to figure out the perfect way for you to grab 4 or 5 pipes and strap them into the back of a friggin' vehicle, and then like a jackass, you decide, you know what, I'm gonna try to carry a bunch of other stuff so I can make a shortcut of this entire trip. And then from there, trying to make sure that it doesn't all end in absolute disaster because you're top heavy, or because the straps don't work because you decided you were gonna overfill the back of your dump truck. Those are enjoyable. But I, for one, absolutely do understand the expectations. It's easy enough to latch onto expectations, especially when the prior titles were enjoyable. You want to see that sequel to a movie or that sequel to a game because you like the original. Luckily, I like the idea that they didn't put a subtitle on this. It's just its own thing, ROADCRAFT, and you got to grab onto that. And honestly, I think that that's going to be highly important because the more they offer and the larger those experiences are, the more a lot of people can say, hey, this is a side thing and we get that, versus just saying, hey, I want a sequel to these other games, which we all do. I do support adjusting and trying new things, even if personally I find myself wanting a sequel to the games that I love. I also like the idea of doing something different, though. They don't necessarily fulfill the gap. That's a sequel and what it would provide. But they do in some ways still hit a particular spot. It's a little bit like a hamburger when you want a steak, or vice versa, depending on just how absolutely chaotic or crazy you are. There were some things that I would like to have seen, some more sim elements, and I do think a hard mode for this game, and I mean a super hard mode where you are tracking all of that stuff, could be a great simulator. But I'm just going to have to see when the full title comes out to really identify if that's absolutely required. With the idea that there is steering wheel support here, I went into the options and the steering wheel supports are all there with force feedback settings and stuff like that. Again, we'll just have to see once the full title is released. That's it for me. I hope you guys like these previews. If you do, give it a thumbs up. If you don't, give it a thumbs up. Check out the Patreon. We talk about inside baseball for video games. We talk about leaks and rumors, but we also just sit back and talk about the games we're playing. People stream in there. We're always doing something. It's a great place to be, and it helps out the channel. Peace out. Enjoy the rest of your week.